opportunities to TA as an undergraduate, and I found it quite enjoyable. And I got to TA for a professor that did a lot of innovative teaching. And so I picked all this up, and I was really excited to go to Berkeley and become a TA and to run my own recitation section. And I remember the first day, I had everything ready. I was ready to go. I was very excited, very revved up. And I remember that at the end of it, it kind of turned in and devolved into one of the scenes from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where, anyone, any questions? Does anyone have any questions? And it was, nobody really wanted to raise their hands. It was very difficult to get people to talk to one another. And then it was at that point that I realized that doing this was not as easy as just walking into the room and being enthusiastic. So over the course of doing that, I developed some of my own innovations to teaching. And I had the opportunity to start as a professor, having a lot of teaching experience behind me. But this is not the typical case. For those of you who are heading into academia, you will, if you reach the top and become a professor at a major research institution or a teaching institution, you will quickly realize that you have had basically zero training for this job. And that is daunting. It's hugely daunting. And so I wanted to just encourage you one thing, is that really pay attention today. Try to pick up more than how to erase the chalkboard, because this represents some of the only training that you're going to receive for your eventual careers in academia. So actually, what I really want to find out, or share with you, first of all, is my experience coming here to CalTech. Even though I had teaching experience, I'm going to admit to you that I was extremely nervous coming here to stand in front of a lecture hall or a room full of CalTech undergraduates. I think we've all heard about how amazingly exceptional these people are, about how the CalTech undergraduates are by far and away the best in the nation. They are just really amazingly bright and smart and everything. And that is mostly true, but do not lose sight of the fact that these are human beings. I remember when I interviewed for this position here, I spent 2 days interviewing. I got one question about teaching. And that one question about teaching was, it looks like you've done some innovation at Berkeley. It's really neat that you've done those different types of teaching. Do you think that it would actually work with CalTech students? And that was my introduction, basically, to what to expect from CalTech students. My next introduction was I got to sit in on an E&M course. This was part of the point that they were trying to get me to come here. And it was supposed to impress me with how great the students were. So I walked in, this was like, I think, the first week of the term, and they were already launching into the relativistic versions of Maxwell's equations. And I was like, wow, I didn't get that until graduate school. And then the students in the front row were continually correcting the professor as he was going through a derivation. So this only reinforced my fear that I was going to stand in front of genius automatons who would catch every single error that I made at the board, and it would soon be revealed that, I was not capable of getting into this institution when I was an undergraduate, and therefore they're going to find out that I don't belong here. And I really did have that fear. But fortunately, I found out that this is not the case. CalTech students are just students. They are people who are going to experience the same things that you experienced when you were undergraduates. They're going to struggle with the same things that you struggled with. They have the potential to get to the answer quicker than I did when I was their age. But they still lack guidance, they still lack context, they still lack methodology, they still lack the fundamentals of being good scientists. And that is a role, highlights one of your roles, is to provide them with that context, to provide them with a view of what they hope to become, who are the graduate students they hope to be. They can see themselves being you before they can see themselves being the white-haired professor standing in front of the classroom. I just lost where I was going with that. It was really inspiring, too, building up this one. Anyway, I know where I was going with that, because I was going to go with my car analogy. When I talk to my colleagues at other institutions, they always want to know what the CalTech undergraduates are like. I've come up with a really good analogy. Whereas a lot of state institutions have lots of really great Hondas and the occasional BMW and everything, a lot of the CalTech graduate students are like Ferraris. and that they have a huge amount of horsepower. But as I was saying, they lack sort of a guidance, they lack kind of a context, and so it's like actually having a Ferrari with no steering wheel. So they will run into a ditch much faster than you would when you were an undergraduate. And it's your job to prevent them from doing that. It's your job to help harness their tremendous horsepower and turn them into young researchers. That's one of the goals here at CalTech, is that our undergraduates are not just students, but we also train them in top-level research. But unfortunately, a lot of times they don't get that from their classes. So I hope that you will be able to fill in those gaps. So let me just outline what I see your role as TAs are. First, I think you need to be your advocate. You're going to provide context. And motivation. You're going to evaluate their learning. Some of you are going to do this in the role of graders. Some of you will run office hours. You'll try to assess what they know and don't know. And you're also going to be a teacher. Now, I've listed those 4 things as separate line items, but they are all intertwined. You cannot be an advocate for them unless you've evaluated what they know and they don't know. You are not going to be able to provide context and motivation until you understand what context and motivation needs to be provided. And there's not much of a difference, in my opinion, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, between evaluation and teaching. A lot of times, we're all have experienced a standard physics class or biology class or something like that, where it goes teach, 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 evaluate at the midterm, teach, 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 evaluate at the final. And if that's the way you do things, you will understand what they don't know too late, especially after the final. So if you make evaluation an integral part of your teaching, then your teaching will become much more effective, and then you'll be able to evaluate further. By doing all of that, then you'll know what context to provide, and you will be a better advocate for them. Now, what do I mean by being an advocate? A lot of the undergraduates are going to see a gigantic chasm between them and the professor. The professor is a CalTech professor. Sometimes they will be a Nobel laureate. And they see a gigantic gap between themselves and that professor. They are very afraid to reveal what they don't know to that professor. Most CalTech students feel insecure about their lot in life here. They feel that they don't belong here. They see their classmates and they see themselves at the middle of a distribution for the first time in their lives. Little do they understand that little distribution that they are part of is out in 4 sigma tail of society, but never mind that. It's all relative. And so what you can do is be a go-between, a liaison, in a sense, between the students and the professor. But you can only do that if you make yourself a person. You can do that only when you evaluate what they know and don't know. You can only do that when you're actually in regular communication with them. And so the first thing I want to encourage you to do is, if you run a recitation section, do not turn it into another lecture. Find a way to make it an interactive environment. Find a way that you can get individualized assistance to a large classroom of students. And so one way to do that, and the method that I use, I replace my lectures actually with this method, is to take what you would lecture about. You no doubt have examples that you would do, starting with a simple example and building it into something bigger. Take that and put it onto a worksheet and list the questions in order of increasing difficulty. Make them very well aligned with the homework and the exam questions, and then pass them out to the students and break them into small groups. 3 or 4 students at a time. Now you can have them work at tables, but I really like to have them up at a board. And what I end up having in my classrooms, if you walk by my lectures, what you'll see are groups of students arrayed around the classroom at whiteboards. And it allows me to just stand in the middle, and I can look over at the boards and I can see that this group gets it, they're on the right path, aha, conceptual misunderstanding. And then I can step into that small group of 3 to 4, and I can provide them with individualized assistance by nudging them into the right direction. Now, there's an art to all of this. First thing is that you cannot put yourself between the students and the board, because then they will sit down and expect you to lecture. But you have to stand behind them, kind of round them up and prod them forward. You ask lots of questions. Avoid trying to bestow all of the knowledge that you know, but instead help them get to the knowledge that you know by asking them insightful questions about it. Right? So look at it and say, oh, interesting. So force has units of meters per second? Is that? And then they're like, oh, right. They say, okay, here's what you want to do. This is an opportunity to teach them. What you want to do is a unit analysis on the right-hand side of this, and this is going to help you quickly uncover errors. You can teach them sort of meta learning. And I find that this is really fun because it turns the classroom into what would normally be half of the room asleep, the other half of the room staring up into space, and one student up front is the only one that raises their hand and asks the questions. What you get is a really enjoyable atmosphere. Everybody's out of their seats, it's kinetic, people are talking, you can barely hear yourself think in the most idealized situation of all this. And so I encourage you that if you have dissertation sections to give this a shot. You can find out all the information that I've documented about this at the Berkeley website. Look for TALC and Berkeley. Google search should turn this up right away. This is now a standardized form of teaching at UC Berkeley in the astronomy program, and it's spreading into physics. And it's a lot of fun. It stands for the Astronomy Learning Center. You can make up your own acronym. TALC, it's good for what ails you if you have that itchy burning feeling and not being prepared for a test. And if you run your office hours this way, for those of you who will only be doing office hours in grading, this is a really good way to get students to come. Advertise it as an opportunity for students to get together with their peers in a room where there are experts present and they can work on their homework. That's what we did with TALC. We started off with a few students. We eventually, by the middle of the semester when I first ran it, we had to go to 2 rooms, each containing 40 students. It was an 800 student lecture. We had 10% of the students going through per night, 3 nights a week, and the students loved it. It turned out to be this thing where the students would just say, hey, you want to work on the homework tonight? I'll meet you at TALC at 8:15. We'd be open for 3 hours. They could come and go as they pleased. So it was a lot of fun. That's the key. If you can find a way to make this enjoyable for you, it'll be enjoyable for the students. It'll allow you to develop relationships with the students where you can understand what they know and they do not know. It will make you a better instructor, and it's going to make the class overall much more effective. And it'll give you the really prime opportunity to be that TA that really leaves a lasting impression on the students. You can really change the trajectory of a CalTech student here. A lot of the classes have a tendency to sort of beat out a lot of the passion that they bring in. It's your opportunity to help introduce some of that passion back into their work. And that can be extraordinarily rewarding. So, figuring out what they know and they don't know. There's a fun story when I was a TA. There was a professor who ran this 800 student lecture. It was Astro 101 essentially. And at one point in the middle of one of his lectures, he decided that he wanted to really illustrate how you can get electromagnetic radiation by varying a dipole. And so he grabbed a bar magnet and was just like, look, and when you wave this magnet, it emits radiation. And then he went on with the rest of his lecture about the electromagnetic spectrum, light, and everything. Midterm hit. One of the questions was, there's a multiple choice question, if I wave a magnet, it produces radiation. And more than half of the students missed it. And the professor was just, he could not understand what happened. I stood in front of the class and I waved my magnet in front of them. How could they not understand that? And kind of in the TA meeting said, because there's no radiation coming out of the magnet when you waved it. They couldn't see that. And you only just said it once in the context of a whole bunch of other stuff. So they didn't pick that up. And he just said, but I made it in the lecture. I said it. I said the words. And I said, well, yes, but there's a difference between words washing over them and them learning about this. And it was a little bit awkward, but it actually kind of broke things open a bit between that professor and his understanding of how the students were learning. This is somebody who was the 4th member out on the recent Nobel Prize for the supernova explosion rate and the rate of expansion in the universe. He was literally the 4th author out. He just missed the cut to get the Nobel Prize. Amazingly brilliant guy. But he had been teaching for so long, he had been lecturing in front of students for so long, he just figured that all he had to do was say the words. This is something really basic. This is something that I think everybody in this room understands, is that when you hear words, it's not the same thing as learning. And this was an opportunity, it was my first opportunity to be a real advocate for the students. And so look for those opportunities, and gently, and politely. Sometimes you might need to bring to the attention to the professor some deficiencies in the student's ability to learn. And so with that, I feel like I've lectured way more than I usually feel comfortable doing. And so what I've done is I've invited 2 actual real-life CalTech undergraduates. It's perfectly safe. So guys, come on up. Let's have a seat over here. What we're going to do is we're going to form a panel. And I'd like for you guys to ask me, as an experienced professor, having taught here, talk with that person about some of the things that you're concerned about, some of the things that you're worried about, some of the things that you're not looking forward to, some of the things you are looking forward to, some of the mysteries about TA that you have. And I want you guys to together come up with one good question to ask. All right, so go ahead.
Do I understand the question correctly, and don't go off on a 10-minute tangent about something that your student didn't ask?
My worst TA experience was when I was a TA, and long story short, I got caught BSing. And rather than going into the gory details, which really actually pains me to this day, it's much better to admit to your students that you actually don't remember a concept well enough to tell them the answer, but you will get back to them in the next session or at office hours. They will respect you a whole lot more, and it actually teaches them a really valuable lesson. That as a CalTech student, you are not expected to know everything all of the time. This is a really important lesson, I think, for undergraduates to learn. Now, we've given you a negative experience. Would you mind sharing one positive experience, Julia?
So the most positive experience with the TA was one of my TAs. She not only had office hours for maybe 4 hours a week, but she also invited the students to come over to her house, meet at the Red Door Cafe for coffee, and talk about things unrelated to the class, about like issues with applying to grad schools, just living in academia. And the fact that she cared so much about the students in the class, far beyond what was expected of her, made us care not only about the class, but we also felt like somebody was caring about us.
So, let's see.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
We had 2 semesters of freshman chemistry. So during the first term was when I had a really good TA, and he would always, before class, make worksheets that had like a summary of the week's lecture material and a few like practice questions that he would work through the class with, and I found that really helpful because it showed that he was prepared. 2, he had looked at the problem set and had put questions that were similar to the problem set that would help us out on the homework. And he covered some of the things that we wouldn't necessarily cover in lectures that really would help us out later on. And that was one of the best TAs that I had last year.
So putting in a little bit of effort, showing some empathy, and being a real person are some of the small things that you can do. You can go even over and above, like meeting them at the Red Door Cafe or having them over to your house one night. I didn't think you was that Jackie? Yeah. No, Jackie was just great. But these types of things make a huge impression on the students, and they really need it. They really do. That chasm that exists between them and most of the professors on campus can really be narrowed down if they can see an older person that they see as somebody that they want to be, that actually cares about them, thinks about them, and empathizes with their experience. And that's not hard to do. We've all gone through what these undergraduates are going through. We've all done it. So now I'd like to open it up to the floor. If anybody has any questions that you have to ask our student panel that came up in your discussion, you can share the shared questions that you have. Yes, Brandon?
Is it more common for the TA to understand the material poorly enough that he can explain it well, or just that he explains perfectly well, or that he understands perfectly well but is very bad at explaining?
So you're asking the most common type of problem, is it that they know a lot but explain it poorly, or that they don't understand the material and therefore, okay, so which is the most common in your experience?
I think it would be difficult to know if they actually understand the material, because I find a lot of times the TAs will present material at a level that's higher than what maybe the class is. And it's hard to say, like, oh, is this because they think the basics are so basic they're not worth teaching? Or is this because they're teaching something we won't understand so that we don't know that they don't know?
Yeah, I think it's probably more commonly that they know the material but don't know how to explain it like at a more basic level, or at least that's been my experience.
It's my experience that TAs here at CalTech try to err on the side of not dumbing things down and assuming that these students are, because they're so exceptional, that they come with an exceptional level of knowledge. And this is simply not true. They are exceptionally talented, yes. It puts them out on the normal tail of the distribution, but they are not so exceptional that they learn like non-humans. They need to learn. They have knowledge, holes in their knowledge, and that's why they're here. And so don't be afraid to make things fairly basic. Even if you have the smart student sitting in the front that kind of scoffs and squirms in their seat and they act bored or whatever, put yourselves in the shoes of the students in the back of the room who are afraid to ask the questions. Keep it at a basic level, and then allow yourself to build up to a higher level on a one-on-one basis once you know a student is at a very high, already knowledgeable level. Yes, up there.
How concerned are CalTech students with their grades? Do a lot of them come to the TAs for better grades?
How many grade rubbers do we get at CalTech?
A lot of grade grubbers. Especially for pre-med students, like in bio and chem, because your GPA is really important factor for getting into med school. But all students are mostly concerned about getting into some sort of graduate program. And so they'll always try to get those couple points back.
Have you experienced anything?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. That's actually different than my experience, but I think it's because I had the fortune of teaching astronomy students kind of off the grid. We're not a part of the core curriculum that you'll be hearing a lot about. And I actually, with my experience with the astronomy undergraduates, well, and a lot of them are physics as well, is that if you can convince them that learning is the most important aspect of all of this by sharing with them your experiences. How did you get into graduate school? What are some of the things that you look back and wish that you had done differently in your classes? If you can sort of share these experiences to them, I think you can alleviate a lot of this desire to grub for grades. And if not, I tend to spend much more of my time with the students who are really interested in learning. I just triage that way.
If I can say one more thing. The moment that I stopped realizing, or the moment that I realized that I didn't need to worry about my grades all the time was when I realized that for my future career, research is much more important, and there are other things much more important than grades. And I think that's something a lot of students don't know. So if you can give them experience of your own in that respect, that would help them like overcome that wish for good grades.
Or that good grades just come as a consequence of actually caring about learning. If you look to learn and you're really devoted to learning, grades just come. If you're after the grade, things get harder. Yes, over here.
Could you guys sort of speak to how a TA can make people comfortable actually asking questions? So you said sort of like, anybody have any questions, and everyone's sort of cricket. So how do you sort of foster an environment, maybe it's fostering an environment where people feel comfortable asking questions, or specific strategies in which you can sort of, I guess the most common and perhaps not as effective method is just pointing to someone and being like, so what are you challenged with right now? So maybe you guys can speak to that a little bit.
So with my own willingness to ask questions, it definitely depends on the atmosphere of the section. Like if I have a TA who every single question you ask, even if it is what is a dot product, is like, okay, I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to actually put effort into answering it and take it as a serious question, then I'm going to feel comfortable asking questions. But if the TA is going to maybe think, oh, well, she's not serious about that question, you know, she's making fun of me or something, I'm not going to answer it, then the first question doesn't get answered, I'm not going to ask anymore.
So for me, I had a TA once who would like constantly ask for feedback, and he would like walk through problems with the class, and he would like not just incorporate the class like asking if you have any questions, but like he would go through and like ask for you to like fill in the blank for like certain problems. Like he's like, this is called, and he would like look at the students and expect them to answer. So kind of like inviting them to participate outside of just asking questions is a good way to get them to start asking questions.
I think one really important concept that it took me a very long time to really incorporate into my teaching, but it's rewarding once I did, is the concept of wait time. If I'm talking and then I say, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody, any questions? Anybody in the, no? Okay, so then I'm going to be going and talking, and then I go into the next concept, and I say, anybody have any questions? There are no questions. Any questions in here? Just feel free to ask any question that you have. Okay, so then moving on. Now that we've covered the basics, now we're going to talk about surface integrals, and then so does anybody know where the dV comes from? Does anybody know? Does anybody know where the dV comes from? You know, this is a nightmare situation, and I've visited other professors' lectures, and I've seen this happen. And no, there's not going to be any question because they can't get one in edwise. So what you need to do is wait an uncomfortably long time. Ask the question and count down slowly from 15. I'm serious. I do this in my AY20 class, and it's a class where I have exceptional participation because of the way that I set up all these interactions and students work. But I still have to allow them to sit there, formulate the question, put it into words, really first of all, they actually have to zero in on what aspect of all that I told them that they really want to know the most about, because they don't understand a lot of it. And then they have to formulate the question, and then they have to realize that nobody else is raising their hand. Here's their chance, and here I go, and I'm going to ask the question. So give them time. Wait, and that uncomfortable silence also prompts them to realize, oh, they actually do want, they want me to ask the question. Okay. So monitor your wait times. Wait that uncomfortable. What I do is I look down on the floor, and actually one of the things I do is I look at the floor and I count my teeth. It prevents me from talking and everything, and it allows the students to realize that I'm not like staring and drilling for it. And then I look up and I see 3 hands. So that's a good strategy. Up here?
Most of what you've been talking about so far has been recitation TA. What about lab TAs? What has made a good or bad lab TA?
Yes, what makes a good and a bad lab TA?
So the good lab TA comes over and stands behind you and tells you what to do, and the bad lab TA does it for you, is what I've found.
In my experience, I would always ask questions in lab, and some TAs are perfectly fine with you asking questions in lab, like constantly. Like I would ask question after question on like, what is a petri dish? Although it probably wouldn't be that basic, but it would be like really simple questions that like I didn't know, and like some of the TAs would kind of stop, like you don't really know what that is, and so like I found it helpful when like they would just provide constructive comments like, this is what you can do in the lab that will help you out.
Additionally, one thing that I find is often missing from lab classes is a motivation for the experiments. Like even if you read the lab manual, you might not get like, well, what does a Michelson interferometer actually mean for anything? So if the TA could explain to the students a greater context for what they're doing, that just increases everything that you get from the lab.
So engineering students, if you are TAing some class where you're learning about friction or something like that, provide them context about your experience doing an internship, you work with brake pads or something like that. Or show them where this will come up later in their life, so that it's not just some stupid block sliding down some stupid inclined plane, seriously, that's kind of weird and lame. Show them how that basic concept of a block sliding actually comes up everywhere. If you're TAing in a waves class or you're a physics lab class and you're learning about waves, help the students understand where else in their life waves are. Challenge them in the middle of nowhere to come up with 5 instances of waves happening in this room right now. And let them talk, and then have them so that they get a context. It's more than just we're wiggling this rope and looking at a standing wave. Wow, awesome. And another thing you can do is when the lab equipment, not if, when the lab equipment does not work properly, help them understand that this is a part of research. Your research apparatus is not going to work perfectly all the time. Matter of fact, most of your life is spent debugging code, getting something to work properly, working on the alignment, things like that. So show them that this is the process. I love to do that with students, is that when they get fed up, they're just so tired of trying to get the lens aligned. And and as a student that told me before that they were interested in instrumentation, I'd like to just do that. There's a wonderful scene from The Wire. Has anybody ever seen The Wire? There's this great scene in The Wire where one of the police officers has to go back up to the top of a building to monitor the drug dealers another day in the sun on the top of a roof. And he's like, oh my God, I have to do that again? And one of the older cops turns to him and he says, this right here, this is the job. This is what you've signed up for. Did you expect it to be any different? If you did, you need to understand that this is what we're doing, and this is a part of it. So that's what I like to do when students are struggling with their apparatus. This right here, this is the job. This is what you're going to spend the rest of your life doing. And even though that sounds horrible and depressing, when it works, and when you publish the paper, and when you're the first person on this planet to know something new about quantum optics, when you're the first person to come to this realization, and you get to share it with the world, that right there, that's the reward. So you can provide them with that context. So empathize first, then give them the reality, then provide them with the motivation. In the very back.
How would you recommend dealing with this situation where explaining the concept 5 times for the student just doesn't get it? You sort of run ad hoc.
Have you guys been in that situation where the TAs told you 3 to 4 times an explanation and you still kind of didn't quite get it?
Usually if the TA tries explaining it different ways, like maybe on the board using an example with an application to a homework problem, I don't think that happens too often that I've seen.
But you just didn't get it at the end of those multiple explanations?
I mean, I guess my TAs have been very persistent.
Nothing to add there?
Not really.
Okay, yeah. So I think that the first thing to do is to really, when you're in that situation, you feel like you've said it 3 different ways and you're out of ways and you don't have no words left to say about that. To not show your exasperation, to really control your emotions in that situation. This is a really key point where you can kind of make or break an undergraduate. If you can remain upbeat, if you can remain optimistic, if you can remain positive in that situation, you can say, look, I understand that this is a really tough concept. There are lots of tough concepts that I struggled with as well. What I've kind of done right now is I feel like I've kind of run out of ways to explain it, but this is on me. I need to learn how to teach, and this is part of my process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about this some more, and I'm going to talk with you again on our next session. But what you shouldn't do is really control your body language. Don't slump your shoulders. Don't look up at the ceiling. Don't sigh, because that can really just crack a student. I mean, that really can destroy their self-confidence. It's really, I found actually pretty surprising how fragile the self-confidence of the CalTech student. I always thought, you're at CalTech. You got into CalTech. You're like one of the, one person from your state or two people from your state got in your year. But this is a really tough environment. This is a real pressure cooker. And what you need to remember at all times is to try to be empathetic.
On reflection, I think the reason this has never happened to me is that I and a lot of other undergrads are more likely to just leave. Like if the TA's explained it twice and we don't understand, we figure, okay, well this is just something I don't understand. I need to go figure it out. The TA, I just am not understanding. And this actually happens a lot. Like people will leave an office hour going, yeah, I don't know what he was talking about at number 2. I have no idea what's going on. So if you actually have a student who's sticking around for those 5 times, I guess that's a good thing.
It is.
right, this is like the best way to answer questions. Because you're gonna remember something better if you've like figured it out on your own, even if they have been prodding you in the right direction for 10 minutes, as opposed to if they just answer your question and then it immediately like jumps out of your head. So I would say that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, one of my worst experiences at office hours was when a TA basically just gave me the answer flat out, and it was really frustrating because I didn't understand like how he got there, and so like I think it definitely helps to just ask like leading questions to like really get them to work in the right direction. But like, yeah, make sure you're still responding to the feedback. Like, if they look completely lost and your question doesn't really seem to help them at all, like try adding some more feedback and like really trying to help them and respond to like, how they're reacting.
I think that that's really, I agree with you said this is the best way to help them learn it, but it's the most challenging way to teach. It's not going to come naturally to you. And it's going to really beware about this. A lot of TAs take the easy route out and just give them a quick answer because you don't run into the risk of really running into the limits of your own knowledge. There are going to be a lot of things that you've taken for granted throughout your entire undergraduate career, and now you're starting here at CalTech that you've just taken for granted. For physicists and astronomers, the idea of like the virial system or virial theorem. And I remember helping the students, and the undergraduates, I asked them questions, and then they asked me questions back. And as a professor, I found myself questioning, wait a second, why do we assume that a system can be assumed to be virialized in this situation? And then it just really forced me to go back to the fundamentals. And it was uncomfortable. This is something I've been assuming for papers I've been writing. And an insightful CalTech student who is now feeling comfortable to ask me really basic questions is now challenging my basic knowledge. And one of my challenges as a professor, and I find it's working really well, is to kind of admit, actually, you know what? That's a genuinely good question. I mean, that is, wow. Okay, you know what? I'm going to get back to you on that. If you do that, that's a real learning moment for that student. That's going to really boost their confidence that it is okay to ask these basic questions. It's going to help them understand that this brilliant CalTech graduate student didn't quite get that. And it's not going to be one of these moments of, geez, oh, this guy, give me a break. That's what you fear. That's what I fear. Geez, this guy. It's going to be more like, oh, wow, I accidentally just asked a really brilliant question. Am I right?
Yes.
I guess when you're teaching, it's often tempting to introduce information or context that you might not have the opportunity to explain completely. So do you generally find that useful, enlightening, or just confusing?
You mean like not fully formed examples, or?
No, I mean like just, for example, referencing a context that might not actually be part of the course, but just to like let you know that there's more to this than like what we're actually doing right now.
Oh, like if you're teaching a math class and you say, oh, you
Well,
can
yeah,
use.
I'm a math grad student, so I guess that's
But like, if you say something like, oh, you can use an Eigen System for orbital dynamics or something like that, I think that would be useful as long as it's mentioned like not in depth, like, oh, if you don't know this is bad. But if you say like, oh, this can be used for this, this, and this, because then it gives that context to what you're learning.
Yeah, I find it helpful too. Like a lot of times, like if a teacher will mention something in class that like just sounded interesting, I'll go back and like Wikipedia search it and like read about it and say, oh hey, that's a really cool application. And so like it's really cool to like see that in action, I guess.
And one thing I want to share about CalTech's undergraduates is that, well, first, I heart CalTech undergraduates. They are the best types of students to teach because they are selected not only for high capability, but they are also, for them to be here, to really pursue getting into an institution like CalTech, to go into the first year, maybe end up in your second year class, they're really passionate about what they're doing. Because otherwise it's just simply not worth it. This is way too hard. They could be at UCLA and partying on Friday, but instead, I often Juliet sends me emails, because she's one of my research students. She sent me an email on Friday night. And I'm just thinking, God, you need to, I mean, I know I need to get out, but you need to get out too. But they are genuinely passionate. This is something that really surprised me, is that this is where they're exceptional. It's not necessarily in their ability compared to a typical state school student. It's their passion for the science that they're in. And what you can do is you can stoke that flame and keep it going and prevent it from being extinguished. Because I think that would be one of the biggest tragedies that happens. And it happens all too often here at CalTech, is that the classes are taught at such a high level and they're so far over a lot of the students' heads and they're aimed at the future Einstein sitting in the front and really not at the whole class. And we leave a lot of students behind, and I think that's a really tragic thing. And so I really want to encourage you to really harness the students' enthusiasm for your topic. They really want to know. Like what you said, that's really commonly what happens. You'll say something interesting, they'll go Wikipedia, and they'll come back to the next class and have a question about it. That's awesome. So take advantage of that.
So you mentioned with these future Einsteins that sit in the front of the row, what do you do if they're disruptive and they keep asking questions that are not entirely relevant or beyond the scope of the course?
Well, first of all, how does it make you feel when there's just that cohort of 3 up in the front and they're dealing with raising their hand?
I guess you feel sort of like, oh, come on. But so there's actually a really good example with application to TAs from a math class I took a freshman year. There was a student who, and the professor is like he's undisputedly brilliant, he's like a great mathematician, but there was a student who kept thinking that he was wrong about things. And he would like pull out his iPad and get up in class and walk up to the front and hold up his iPad to the professor and go, look, you're wrong. So how the TAs in the class can handle this is one of them went to the student as he was going to bother the professor and stepped outside with him and had a talk. And I don't know what the talk entailed, but he did it again. So I guess that was your job.
So it seems like every year we have someone we call the question frosh. And this is the frosh that is always sitting up in the front row asking question after question after question. And I'm pretty sure it gets tiring for the professor. And so I think like maybe a good strategy would be to say, hey, we'll talk about it after class if you have like all these questions that are not related to the material. And so just like say we'll talk about it after class and so that we can get through the material that actually is important and much more relevant. And yeah.
There are the occasional weird science stereotypes. What is that? What was the document for? One that was set here.
Real genius.
Yeah, what is it?
Real genius.
Real genius, right? You'll get that stereotypical CalTech student. A lot of them are just really regular, normal people that are engaged in athletics and they play music and they're very social. They like to party. They're just regular old college students. But we do have a tale, and we have a really interesting tale. And you have the question frosh.